storms, and small miracles. The rain came down in shimmering sheets, pounding the cracked sidewalks and running in thin streams along the gutters. It wasn't a gentle drizzle or a cleansing summer shower. This rain was relentless, cold, and heavy, the kind that soaked through clothes and settled into bones. David Carter's hood was pulled low, the frayed edges of his jacket sagging under the weight of the downpour. Each step sent water squelching inside his shoes, but he hardly noticed anymore. Rain had been a constant in his life lately. The weather, his luck, his circumstances, all of it seemed soaked through with a quiet, miserable dampness. Beside him, a smaller figure splashed through puddles with glee, her bright red rain boots flashing like beacons against the gray. Lily, his 6-year-old daughter, clutched his hand with her small fingers, her pink raincoat swaying with every skip. "Daddy, look at this one," she exclaimed, stomping into a puddle so large it swallowed her boot nearly to the ankle. Water sprayed out, dousing David's jeans even more. "Careful, Lil," he said, managing a tired smile. Her laughter, light and sparkling, was the only brightness in his world. "We don't need any more laundry tonight." They were heading home from the grocery store, the old metal cart they pushed together groaning under the weight of a few battered bags. One loaf of bread, a quart of milk, a few dented cans of soup, and a small bundle of bananas. The absolute basics, carefully selected to stretch until Friday. Lily didn't know about the notice tucked into David's jacket pocket, the one with the bold final warning stamped across the top. She didn't need to. For now, her world was still colored with rainbows and puddles, and David was willing to carry the storm on his own shoulders to keep it that way. As they turned onto Maple Avenue, David spotted a sleek black car pulled onto the curb, hazard lights blinking through the mist. The car's hood was propped open, steam curling into the rain as if the vehicle itself had given up on the day. A woman stood beside it, her umbrella half collapsed and her designer coat clinging to her frame like a second skin. Even from a distance, David could see the frustration etched into her features as she stared at her phone, fingers moving with increasing speed. "Daddy, she needs help," Lily whispered, tugging on his sleeve. David hesitated. He had no time for detours. There was a job interview scheduled in less than an hour. A warehouse shift, nothing glamorous, but it was work. Work meant hope, and hope was something he couldn't afford to let slip away. But Lily's wide eyes were impossible to resist. "All right," David murmured, steering the cart onto the sidewalk. "Let's see what we can do." The woman glanced up at their approach, suspicion flickering in her eyes before being overtaken by relief. "Hi there," David said, raising a hand. "Need a hand?" The woman's brow furrowed. "I got a flat, and my battery warning light's on. My phone." She waved the useless device in frustration. No signal. David stepped closer, eyeing the car with the practiced gaze of someone who had spent years working with his hands. Before everything fell apart, before the layoffs and the lost shifts, and the nights spent at the kitchen table staring at unpaid bills, he had been a mechanic. A good one. "I can take a look," he said simply. The woman hesitated for only a moment before stepping aside, relief cutting through her rain-dampened composure. "If you can fix this, I'll owe you a favor." "No favors needed," David replied, already crouching beside the tire. "Just passing through." Lily stood beside the woman, her small hands cupped together to catch the rain. "My daddy's really good at fixing stuff," she informed the stranger confidently. The woman's tense features softened. "He's lucky to have such a sweet assistant." David worked quickly, hands steady despite the cold. The tire was salvageable, but the battery connection was loose, probably shaken free by one too many potholes. A quick adjustment, a few spins of the lug wrench, and within 10 minutes, the car was drivable again. "All set," David said, straightening and wiping his hands on his jeans. The woman reached into her purse and held out a crisp $50 bill. "Please, take this. It's the least I can do." David shook his head, stepping back. "No need." But she was persistent. "Then let me give you two a ride. You're soaked." David hesitated. They could make it to the interview faster. And Lily was already shivering despite her cheerful facade. Reluctantly, he nodded. "All right. Thanks." As Lily climbed into the back seat, her boots leaving small wet prints on the immaculate floor mats, the woman turned toward David. "I'm Olivia," she said, offering a hand. "David," he replied, shaking it briefly. The warmth of the car was almost jarring after the rain, and Lily let out a contented sigh as she clutched her soggy stuffed bunny to her chest. As they drove, Olivia glanced at the reflection of father and daughter in the rearview mirror. "You're heading somewhere important?" Olivia asked. "Interview," David said, not elaborating. Olivia didn't pry. "I hope it goes well." "Thanks." His voice was gruff, but sincere. The car pulled up in front of a small, unassuming office building. It wasn't much, but it was his last hope. As David opened the door, Lily scampered out after him, her hand slipping instinctively into his. "Good luck," Olivia said softly as they disappeared into the building. Neither of them could have known that one rainy encounter would unravel a future neither had imagined. The office smelled faintly of old carpet and disinfectant, the kind of place where hope felt temporary. A receptionist glanced up, her eyes flickering to Lily before settling on David's waterlogged form. "David Carter." He nodded. "The interviewer's running late. Please have a seat." David sank into a plastic chair, Lily crawling onto his lap. "Daddy, you'll get the job, right?" "I'll try my best," he whispered, kissing the top of her damp hair. The minutes ticked by. Finally, the door swung open, and a man in a too-tight suit beckoned David forward. "You can leave your daughter here." Lily gave him a reassuring smile. "I'll be okay, Daddy." With a reluctant nod, David followed the man into the interview room, leaving Lily coloring at the receptionist's desk. The interview was routine. Skills, experience, the awkward gaps in his resume that David couldn't disguise. He spoke about problem solving, about working under pressure, and though his hands were still cold from the rain, his voice held steady. The interviewer's face was unreadable, and when he ended with the dreaded, "We'll be in touch," David's stomach twisted. When they stepped back outside, the rain had slowed, but the weight in his chest hadn't lifted. Lily's fingers slipped into his again. "How did it go, Daddy?" "It went fine, sweetheart." He forced a smile, her trust too precious to tarnish with doubt. The walk home was quiet, interrupted only by Lily's chatter about school and puddles and dreams of what they would do when things got better. David let her voice carry him forward, unaware that fate was already shifting around him, all because of a flat tire in the rain. The weight of choices. David Carter stood at the window of his small one-bedroom apartment, the city beyond coated in a thin veil of rain. Though it was softer now, almost hesitant. The same couldn't be said for the storm inside him. His interview had ended the way they all did lately. Polite smiles, a firm handshake, and that hollow promise of, "We'll be in touch." It didn't matter that David knew his way around engines, that his hands could bring a dead car back to life with little more than duct tape and a prayer. None of it mattered when you were just another unemployed single father with too many gaps on your resume and too much baggage you couldn't hide. Lily sat at their small kitchen table, her stubby crayon clutched tight in her fist as she drew another picture. This one of her and David holding hands under a bright yellow sun. Her innocent world was still filled with sunshine, even if David's wasn't. He envied her ability to color in joy where reality had left things blank. "Daddy," she said, not looking up from her masterpiece, "do you think they'll call you?" David forced a smile, even though his heart ached at the question. "Maybe, sweetheart." The lie tasted bitter. The eviction notice still sat on the counter where he'd left it, a silent reminder that hope wasn't enough. They had 2 weeks left, maybe 3 if the landlord felt merciful, before they'd have nowhere to go. David had been treading water for months now, and his arms were tired. But just when he was about to sink under that weight, his phone rang. It was an unfamiliar number. David stared at it, fingers hovering. Bill collector. Another rejection. Maybe someone mistaking him for someone else entirely. He answered anyway. Hello. The voice on the other end was bright, warm, and unmistakable. David, this is Olivia Bennett. We met. In the rain. David's mind flitted back to the sleek black car, the broken umbrella, the way Lily had stood beside Olivia, catching raindrops in her hands. He hadn't expected to hear from her again. Oh, hi, he said, awkward and off balance. I hope I'm not catching you at a bad time, Olivia said. I just wanted to thank you again for helping me. And well, I may have done a little digging. David stiffened. Digging? Nothing intrusive, Olivia said quickly. I just wanted to know who the man was who fixed my car without expecting anything in return. And I found someone who deserves a second chance. David didn't know what to say. His throat tightened. I own a company, Olivia continued. It's not huge, but it's growing. We need someone to oversee our facilities. Maintenance, logistics, repairs. Someone who knows how to get their hands dirty and isn't afraid to fix what's broken. David leaned against the counter, suddenly too tired to hold himself up. Why me? Because you didn't ask for anything that day in the rain, Olivia said simply. And because I believe everyone deserves a shot, especially the ones willing to offer kindness when they have nothing to spare. David's chest ached, not from fear, but from something dangerously close to hope. I don't know what to say. Say you'll come in tomorrow. We can talk details. David looked at Lily, her face crunched up in concentration as she drew a tree with a swing hanging from one of its branches, a version of the life they'd never had. I'll be there, he said. The first meeting. The next morning, David stood outside a modern glass building that seemed like it belonged in a different world. A world where people wore pressed suits and carried leather briefcases. His reflection in the glass looked foreign. His worn jacket, too thin shoes, and the constant presence of Lily's hand in his. Daddy, this place looks fancy, Lily whispered. It's just a building, David said, though the knot in his stomach told a different story. Inside, the receptionist smiled warmly. She didn't give him the usual once-over he'd gotten at his interviews, the one that measured the frayed edges of his clothes and found him wanting. Mr. Carter, Ms. Bennett is expecting you. David sat beside Lily in the waiting area. Her feet barely touched the floor, swinging happily as if they were at the park. David wished he could borrow even a sliver of that confidence. When Olivia appeared, she was nothing like the rain-drenched woman he'd met by the side of the road. She was poised, her sleek navy suit tailored perfectly, but her smile was genuine. David, she said warmly, I'm so glad you came. Lily grinned up at her. Hi, Miss Olivia. Do you have snacks? David's ears burned, but Olivia laughed. I think we can find something. The conversation that followed was equal parts interview and conversation. Olivia asked about his past work, his skills, his ideas. But what struck David most was how much she listened, not just to his words, but to what he wasn't saying. The desperation, the exhaustion, the sheer willpower it took to keep standing when the world wanted him to fall. I'm not looking for perfect, Olivia said finally. I'm looking for someone who cares. I think that's you. David could barely breathe. You're offering me the job. I'm offering you a chance, Olivia corrected gently. What you do with it is up to you. A rocky start. The first week was harder than David expected. It wasn't the work. He could fix just about anything with enough time and duct tape, but the environment. The other employees were polished professionals, the kind who used words like synergy and scalability. They didn't know what to make of him, the man with oil under his nails, and a daughter who sometimes had to sit in the corner of his office with her coloring books when childcare fell through. Is that your kid? One employee asked during a staff meeting. eyeing Lily with barely concealed disapproval. "She's my assistant," David said flatly. Lily beamed and waved. "Hi." Somehow, that disarmed most of the tension. David knew he wasn't what they were used to, but he also knew how to work, really work. When a major piece of machinery broke down late on his second day, it was David who rolled up his sleeves and crawled under it, working long past closing time to get it running again. The next morning, Olivia found him still there, grease on his hands and Lily asleep in the office chair. "You didn't have to stay all night," she said softly. "I did," David replied, "because if this fails, I lose more than a job." There was no pity in Olivia's eyes, only understanding. "Go home," she said gently. "Get some rest. Trust and second chances." Over the following weeks, David began to prove himself in ways that had nothing to do with interviews or resumes. He fixed things, not just machines, but processes, workflows. The little inefficiencies no one noticed until they added up to big problems. He wasn't flashy, but he was steady. More than that, he was kind. To the janitor who cleaned his office, to the warehouse team who were used to being overlooked, even to the receptionist who offered Lily an endless supply of office pens. Olivia noticed it all. One evening, long after most employees had gone home, Olivia found David sitting on the floor beside Lily, helping her build a castle out of cardboard scraps and packing tape. "You've done more here in a month than most managers do in a year," Olivia said quietly. David looked up. "I just fix things." Olivia smiled. Sometimes, fixing things is exactly what's needed. Their eyes met, a moment of connection neither of them could fully name. When walls come down, the steady hum of the building's ventilation system was a soft background noise as David walked the length of the maintenance floor. His steel-toed boots echoed in the empty hallway. The day shift had already clocked out, leaving only the soft glow of emergency lights and the occasional drip of a leaky pipe somewhere in the far corner. David wasn't just walking the floor. He was studying it, learning its secrets. Every building had a heartbeat, a pulse beneath the polished floors and glass walls. This one was still new to him, but he was learning its quirks, the sounds it made when something was out of place, the way the machinery shifted when it was overworked. It was the kind of knowledge you couldn't teach, only absorbed through long hours and dirty hands. He'd been at Olivia's company for a month now, longer than he had lasted at most places since losing his old mechanic job. The difference wasn't just the work, though that was challenging enough. The difference was Olivia herself. She was everywhere, not in a micromanaging way, but in a present way. When the receptionist's daughter came down with the flu, Olivia sent soup and a handwritten note. When the warehouse crew lost 2 pallets worth of inventory because of a vendor mistake, Olivia was on the floor helping them sort replacements. She remembered birthdays. She asked about people's weekends and actually cared about the answers. That kind of leadership was rare, and it made David want to work even harder. 2 worlds colliding. The line between work and home had always been blurry for David. It had to be, with Lily constantly at his side, a small hurricane of pink sneakers and curiosity. But now, that line was dissolving entirely. Some evenings, when daycare fell through, Lily sat in his office, crayons scattered across his desk, while David worked through equipment reports and repair schedules. More than once, Olivia had walked in to find Lily asleep in David's oversized office chair, a makeshift blanket of Olivia's blazer draped over her. David never knew what to say in those moments, apologizing awkwardly each time, but Olivia always waved him off. "She's part of the team," Olivia would say with a soft smile, "and the team looks out for each other." It wasn't just words either. One afternoon, David found Olivia sitting cross-legged on the floor beside Lily, a tiny cup of imaginary tea balanced in her palm. "She says you take 2 sugars," Lily said matter-of-factly, pouring air into the cup with a plastic teapot. "I do," Olivia replied solemnly, "but only on Fridays." David leaned against the doorframe, watching the scene with something tugging at his chest, something he hadn't felt in a long time. Safety, belonging, not just for him, but for Lily too. A ghost from the past. It was almost too good to last. The letter arrived on a Tuesday, slipped beneath the door of their apartment, just as David was heading out to work. The envelope was plain, the kind landlords used when the eviction notices got serious. But this wasn't from his landlord. It was from Lily's grandmother. David's stomach clenched as he read the neat, emotionless lines. Lily's maternal grandmother, a woman who had never forgiven him for his wife's death, was petitioning for custody. The argument was as cruel as it was predictable. David was unstable, unemployed, or had been until recently, and incapable of providing Lily with the life she deserved. He sat at the kitchen table long after the letter had slipped from his fingers, Lily humming softly as she played with her dolls nearby. The idea of losing her, of her bright laughter fading from his life, was a weight too heavy to hold. The conversation. David didn't plan to tell Olivia. It wasn't her problem, after all. But Olivia had a way of seeing through people, especially him. He was fixing a jammed conveyor belt late one evening when Olivia appeared at his side, 2 cups of coffee in hand. She handed him one without a word, leaning against the machine as he worked. "You've been off lately," she said after a long silence. "Want to tell me why?" David's hands tightened around the wrench. "It's nothing." "It's something," Olivia said, her voice gentle but firm. And somehow, the words spilled out. The letter, the custody threat, the gnawing fear that no matter how hard he worked, it would never be enough to erase the mistakes of his past. When he was done, Olivia didn't offer empty platitudes or tell him it would all be fine. Instead, she said something far more valuable. "You're a good father, David." His throat closed. He wasn't used to hearing that, not from anyone who mattered. "I'm not perfect," he said. "No one is," Olivia replied. "But you love her, and that counts for more than you think." The unexpected offer. The next morning, Olivia called David into her office. A stack of papers sat on her desk, but she pushed them aside as he entered. "I was thinking about what you said," she began, "and I want to help." David shook his head immediately. "This isn't your problem." "That's where you're wrong," Olivia said. "Lily is part of this company now, and so are you. We take care of our own." She slid a folder across the desk. Inside were documents, proof of David's employment, letters of recommendation from team members, even a notarized statement from Olivia herself, vouching for David's reliability and dedication. "This is for the court," she said, "if it comes to that." David stared at the papers, his vision blurring. "Why would you do this for me?" "Because someone gave me a second chance once," Olivia said softly, "and because you deserve to keep the most important person in your life." The first hearing. The courtroom was colder than David expected. All hard edges and sharp words. Lily's grandmother sat at the opposite table, her lawyer a tall man with a voice like sandpaper, reading out every misstep David had ever made. Unstable employment, a history of financial struggles, an eviction notice that was still technically active. David sat silently, hands folded, listening as his failures were laid bare for all to see. But when it was his turn to speak, he stood tall. "I'm not perfect," he admitted, voice steady, "but I love my daughter. I've fought for her every single day since she was born. I'm not asking you to pretend I haven't made mistakes. I'm asking you to see the man I'm trying to be. For her." Olivia's letter was entered into evidence. Testimonies from his coworkers, even a handwritten note from the receptionist who had watched Lily color at the front desk, all painted a picture not of a perfect father, but of one who never gave up. The judge didn't make a ruling that day, but David saw something shift in her expression, a flicker of understanding, perhaps even respect. Storms and shelter. The custody battle stretched for weeks, a storm David couldn't outrun. But through it all, Olivia stood beside him, not as a boss, but as a friend, Some nights, after Lily was asleep, they sat on David's worn sofa, drinking cheap coffee and talking about nothing and everything. Olivia told him about her own past, about losing her parents young, about building her company from the ground up with no safety net, about how sometimes the only thing that kept her going was the hope that her work might mean something to someone. It already does, David told her one night. It meant everything to me. The words hung between them, heavier than they realized. The verdict. The ruling came on a rainy Tuesday, the kind of day that had started it all. The judge's voice was formal, her decision clear. David would retain custody. Tears stung his eyes, but he blinked them back, scooping Lily into his arms as she cheered. They walked out of the courthouse into the rain, where Olivia was waiting with a bright pink umbrella. "I knew you could do it," she said. David shook his head, his smile trembling. "We did it." They stood together, a trio of resilience, a father, a daughter, and the woman who had become so much more than a boss. The rain poured down, but this time, David didn't mind. Building bridges and breaking walls. The rain had stopped by the time David and Lily left the courthouse, but the sky remained heavy with clouds, the kind of gray that made you wonder if the storm was really over or just waiting to return. David's breath came slow and uneven as they walked down the steps, Lily's tiny hand clutching his. The ruling had been in their favor, but the battle had left him drained. Even victory felt fragile, like a paper boat floating on a still pond. Beautiful for the moment, but always one strong gust away from sinking. At the curb, Olivia stood waiting, her bright pink umbrella held aloft even though the sky was dry. Lily's favorite color. Olivia had remembered. "You did it," Olivia said, a wide smile lighting up her face. She crouched down, holding her arms open. Lily ran to her, the bond between them deepening in a way that made David's heart both swell with gratitude and ache with something he wasn't ready to name. "We did it," David corrected softly, his voice rough with exhaustion. But Olivia's smile didn't falter. "Yeah, we did." The days after. Winning the custody case felt like winning a war. But wars leave scars, even when you're the victor. At work, David threw himself into his responsibilities. The maintenance systems at Olivia's company were running smoother than ever, thanks to his methodical approach and hands-on leadership. His team had begun to respect him, not because of some fancy title, but because he had earned it, with grease under his nails and a relentless commitment to making things better. But at home, it was harder. Lily sensed the tension that lingered in David's shoulders, the way he sometimes stared at the kitchen table long after dinner was done, lost in thought. Her drawings grew more detailed. Less sunshine and flowers, more rain clouds and stick figures holding umbrellas. When David asked her about them, she just shrugged. "Sometimes it rains," she said simply. David knew she was right. But it still hurt. The dinner invitation. It was Olivia who saw it first, the invisible weight David carried, even after the court battle ended. She had her own burdens, of course, though she rarely spoke of them. But one evening, after a particularly long day of meetings and repairs, she appeared at David's office door with a small paper bag in her hands. "What's that?" David asked, looking up from a stack of repair logs. "Dinner," Olivia said, stepping inside. "I figured you probably forgot to eat." David's stomach growled at the mere thought of food, betraying him before he could protest. "You didn't have to do that." "I know," Olivia said, setting the bag down. "But I wanted to." Inside were 3 takeout containers, one for him, one for Lily, and one labeled Olivia. His chest heightened at the sight of Lily's name written in bright purple marker, a tiny flower drawn next to it. Olivia always paid attention to the smallest details. "Join us," David said, the words out before he could think them through. Olivia hesitated for only a moment before nodding. "Okay." A shared table. They sat at the small, mismatched table in David's apartment, Lily happily slurping noodles while Olivia and David ate more quietly. The conversation was light at first, Stories from Lily's school day. A joke she'd heard from her friend Amelia. Her plans to draw a super fancy castle with her new markers. But as the meal wound down and Lily drifted into the living room to play, the silence between David and Olivia grew heavier. Not uncomfortable, exactly, just full of things unsaid. "You didn't have to write that letter for the court," David said finally, his voice low. "You put your reputation on the line for me." Olivia shook her head. "No, I didn't. I told the truth. You deserve to keep your daughter." David's fingers curled around his cup. "I've never had anyone stand up for me like that." Olivia's expression softened. "Maybe it's time you did." The words hung between them, heavy with meaning, with possibilities neither of them knew how to name. A new kind of partnership. In the weeks that followed, Olivia began to rely on David in ways that went beyond maintenance schedules and repair logs. She asked his opinion on projects, brought him into strategy meetings where his practical, no-nonsense approach was a refreshing contrast to the usual corporate jargon. It wasn't just that Olivia trusted him, she valued him. And for a man who had spent so long feeling invisible, that meant everything. One afternoon, as they stood side by side reviewing blueprints for a planned warehouse expansion, Olivia said something that caught David off guard. "I want you to help design this," she said, tapping the paper. "Not just the infrastructure, the whole flow. You know how people actually work. I want it to make sense for them." David blinked. "That's not really my job." "Maybe it should be," Olivia said, her gaze steady. "You don't just fix things, David. You understand them." No one had ever said that to him before, not even his old bosses back at the garage. He'd always been the guy who showed up, did what was asked, and clocked out. But Olivia saw something else in him, something David wasn't sure he even saw in himself. "I'll try," he said. "I know you will," Olivia replied. Storms of a different kind. Just as David began to feel like he was finding his footing, life, as it often did, threw another storm his way. It started with a leak, a slow drip in the warehouse ceiling, barely noticeable at first. David chalked it up to aging pipes and scheduled a minor repair. But by the following week, that drip had turned into a steady trickle, and then a full-on stream. The roof needed replacing. A massive, costly project that couldn't wait, and with the company already stretched thin after a recent expansion, Olivia faced an impossible choice: cut budgets elsewhere or risk the entire operation grinding to a halt. David knew what she was thinking before she said it. "If you need to cut my department." "No," Olivia interrupted, her voice firm. "We don't cut the people who keep this place running." The certainty in her voice stunned him. No hesitation. No weighing pros and cons. Just unwavering loyalty. "You really believe that?" David asked quietly. "I believe in you," Olivia replied. "We'll find another way." The late-night plan. That night, after Lily was asleep, David sat at his kitchen table, blueprint in front of him, a notebook beside it. He wasn't just thinking about repairs. He was thinking about solutions. The warehouse needed a new roof, yes, but what if it could be more than that? What if they could install solar panels, reducing long-term energy costs? What if they could redesign the ventilation system to be more efficient, cutting utility bills even further? By the time the sun rose, David had a full proposal sketched out. Not just a repair plan, but a reinvention. A way to turn the company's immediate problem into a long-term investment. When he showed Olivia the next morning, her eyes widened. "You did all this last night?" David shrugged. "Couldn't sleep." "This is brilliant," Olivia said softly. "You're not just fixing the roof, you're building the future." He didn't know what to say to that, so he just said, "We make it work." Olivia's smile was radiant. "Yeah, we do." A shift in the air. That night, after the proposal was approved and work was set to begin, David and Olivia stood outside the building, the evening air cool and clear. "You saved my company," Olivia said quietly. David shook his head. We saved it." They stood in silence, the tension between them shifting into something warmer, something that had been building since that first rainy night. "David," Olivia said softly, "why did you stop to help me that day?" David thought about how tired he'd been, how desperate, about how Lily's small voice had made him pause when all he'd wanted was to keep walking. "Because Lily asked me to," he said finally. "And because I know what it's like to need help." Olivia reached for his hand, her fingers warm against his. "We all do," she said. They stood there, hand in hand, two people who had weathered storms, both literal and figurative, and somehow found shelter in each other. Where hope takes root. The world had changed quietly for David Carter. It wasn't just the job, though the steady paycheck and the sense of purpose had filled holes he didn't realize were so deep. It was something harder to name, something that stirred inside him every time he saw Olivia walk into the room, every time her hand brushed his just a second longer than necessary. They never talked about it. They were too careful, both of them. Olivia had built her walls out of ambition and self-reliance. David had built his out of survival. They were two people who had learned not to need anyone. Until, somehow, they needed each other. New seasons, old shadows. The leaves began to change, their edges rusting into orange and gold, as the company's operations settled into a rhythm. The solar panels David had suggested were installed, and Olivia had insisted on a celebration. A cookout in the parking lot, complete with burgers, music, and a bounce house for the kids of employees. Lily was the first one inside the bounce house, her laughter rising above the conversations of maintenance crews, office staff, and managers who were seeing David in a new light, not just as the man who fixed broken things, but as the man Olivia Bennett trusted. David stood at the edge of the crowd, hands in his pockets, watching Lily bounce high enough to touch the sky. "You did this," Olivia said, appearing beside him, a paper plate balanced in one hand. David shook his head. "I fixed some machines." "No," Olivia said softly. "You gave people something to believe in. And that's worth more than any machine." David wasn't sure how to respond to that, so he didn't. But her words followed him, even after the sun dipped low and Lily fell asleep in the backseat on the drive home. The call that changed everything. It was 3 weeks later when the call came. David was under a delivery truck, trying to trace a persistent oil leak, when his phone buzzed in his pocket. He wiped his hands on his jeans and pulled it out, expecting a message from Lily's school or maybe Olivia asking for an update. Instead, it was a number he hadn't seen in years. He almost let it go to voicemail. Almost. But something in his gut told him to answer. "Hello." The voice on the other end was thin and reedy, but unmistakable. "David." His chest tightened. "Mom." The silence stretched long enough to cut. Her voice faltered. "I heard about the custody case. About Lily." David closed his eyes, leaning back against the truck's rusted undercarriage. "How?" "Your sister. She's been following online, I guess. Told me everything." David hadn't spoken to his mother in over 5 years, not since she'd made it clear she thought Lily would be better off with someone else. Anyone else, after David's wife passed. When he'd lost his job and ended up scraping by with part-time gigs, she pulled away completely, her silence sharper than any accusation. "What do you want?" His voice was quieter than he meant. "I want to see you," she said. "And Lily." David's heart clenched. He wasn't sure which emotion hit first, anger, fear, or the smallest flicker of hope. Olivia's advice. That evening, after Lily had drifted to sleep with her stuffed bunny tucked under her arm, David sat on the couch, staring at the number on his phone. He hadn't called back. He didn't want to. But he couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't just his choice to make. There was only one person he knew who could help him think it through. It was late when Olivia answered the door, her hair down, a mug of tea in her hand. "Hey," she said, a little surprised. "Is everything okay?" "Can I talk to you?" David asked. voice rough. Of course. She led him inside. Her apartment was nothing like he expected. Cozy, soft light, books stacked everywhere, half-finished projects scattered on the coffee table. For all her composure at work, this was the first time David had seen the part of her that was unfinished, imperfect. He told her everything. About the call, about the silence that had stretched for years between him and his mother, about the fear curling low in his stomach at the thought of letting her back in. When he was done, Olivia sat quietly for a moment, her fingers tracing the rim of her mug. "I can't tell you what to do," she said finally. "But I can tell you this. People change. Sometimes for the better. Sometimes they don't. But if there's even a chance that she's trying to fix what she broke, maybe it's worth letting her try." David's fingers curled into his palms. "What if she hurts Lily?" "You won't let that happen," Olivia said softly. "I know you." The reunion. David agreed to meet his mother at a small park a few miles from his apartment. Neutral ground. Lily ran ahead, her jacket flapping, her backpack bouncing against her back, blissfully unaware of the weight her father carried behind her. His mother was sitting on a weathered bench beneath a willow tree, her hands clasped in her lap. She looked smaller than he remembered, older, thinner, as if the years had worn her down too. Lily stopped short, glancing back at David. "Who's that lady?" David swallowed hard. "That's your grandma." Lily's face brightened. "I have a grandma." "Yeah," David said. "You do." Lily approached cautiously, curiosity outweighing shyness. "Hi," she said, voice high and clear. "I'm Lily." Tears shimmered in the older woman's eyes. "Hi, sweetheart. I'm so happy to meet you." David stood a few feet back, heart thundering, ready to step in, to shield, to protect. But for now, Lily was smiling. And for now, that was enough. Growing pains. It wasn't easy. Trust never was. His mother wanted to meet for coffee, to see Lily again, to try, for the first time, to be part of their lives. Some days it felt too fragile to hold. Some days, David wanted to shove the door closed again and lock it tight. But Olivia's voice echoed in his mind. People change. And maybe, just maybe, his mother was one of them. A different kind of family. The holidays crept closer, and the company holiday party arrived faster than David expected. Employees filled the office with garlands and lights, and Lily, self-appointed decorating supervisor, directed every step of the process. When Olivia arrived, dressed in deep green, her smile was softer than David had ever seen it. They stood side by side, watching Lily hang paper snowflakes, her laughter rising above the hum of conversation. "You've done a good job with her," Olivia said quietly. David's throat tightened. "I've had help." Their eyes met, and this time, neither of them looked away. The moment that changed it all. After the party ended and the office emptied, David found himself alone with Olivia, standing beside the twinkling tree. The only light in the room came from the colored bulbs, painting her face in soft shades of red and gold. "You asked me once why I helped you," Olivia said softly. David nodded. "Yeah. It wasn't just kindness," she admitted. "It was hope. You gave me hope that day in the rain, hope that people still show up for each other." David took a step closer. "I didn't just show up for you." The silence between them hummed, fragile, electric, full of every unspoken thing they had built between them. "David," Olivia whispered. He kissed her, softly at first, then with all the gratitude, fear, and quiet longing they had both been holding back. And in that moment, with her hands in his and her heart beating against his chest, David realized something. Home wasn't a place. It was here, in her arms, with his daughter's laughter echoing in the halls. The roots we plant. The first snowfall of the year dusted the streets with soft white, and Lily's nose pressed eagerly against the cold windowpane of their apartment. She traced little patterns with her finger, enchanted by the way the frost clung to the glass. David stood behind her, a mug of coffee warming his hands, though his mind was elsewhere. Everything had changed in the past year. Not just his job, not just his financial security, but the way his world felt when he woke up every morning. There was light again. There was possibility. And there was Olivia. Since the night of the holiday party, their relationship had shifted, though neither of them had dared to label it yet. They'd built something too fragile to rush, something woven from long conversations, stolen glances, and quiet moments where nothing needed to be said. Olivia had become more than a boss, more than a friend. She had become a safe place. For David, that was terrifying and exhilarating all at once. A new beginning. Christmas was simpler than the ones Lily saw in cartoons. No towering piles of gifts or fancy decorations, but there was laughter and hot cocoa, and a tree David and Lily had decorated with construction paper ornaments. Olivia arrived late in the afternoon, her arms full of packages, though David had told her not to bring anything. "Too bad," Olivia said, grinning. "I'm stubborn." Lily tore into the gifts with the reckless abandon of a child who hadn't had a Christmas like this in years. A new set of art supplies, a book about space and planets, a sweater with a glittery unicorn on the front. David leaned against the kitchen doorway, arms crossed. "You didn't have to do all this." "I know," Olivia said, her smile softer now. "But I wanted to." And for once, David didn't argue. When the past knocks. It was the day after Christmas when the call came, this time from his mother. "I'd like to see Lily again," she said hesitantly. If that's okay." David hesitated. The visit at the park had gone better than expected, but the years of silence and judgment couldn't be erased in a single afternoon. Still, Olivia's words echoed in his mind. People change. So he said yes. They met at a cafe, neutral ground again. His mother arrived wearing the same coat David remembered from his childhood, though it hung looser on her now, as though the years had worn her down physically as well as emotionally. Lily was shy at first, hiding behind David's leg, but curiosity won out. By the time the cocoa arrived, she was chattering about her new art supplies and her plans to draw the whole universe, but with unicorns. His mother listened, really listened, not just nodding politely, but asking questions, leaning in, remembering. It was strange, seeing her try. It wasn't perfect, it wasn't effortless, but it was something. As they left the cafe, Lily holding her grandmother's hand on one side and David's on the other, David felt the fragile threads of forgiveness weaving themselves into something stronger. The company crossroads. The company was thriving, partly thanks to David's maintenance overhaul, partly thanks to Olivia's leadership, and partly thanks to the culture shift they had built together. Employees felt seen now. Problems were addressed before they grew into crisis. David had made sure every system, from the boilers to the break-room coffee machine, worked not just efficiently, but in ways that made sense for the people using them. But success comes with attention, and attention isn't always friendly. One cold afternoon, Olivia called David into her office. The smile she usually wore was absent, replaced with a thoughtful crease in her brow. "We have an offer," she said, sliding a folder across the desk. David opened it and froze. A corporate conglomerate, the kind with shiny brochures and slick executives, had made an unsolicited bid to buy Olivia's company outright. The number was staggering, life-changing. "They want everything," Olivia said quietly. "The buildings, the contracts, the team." "And you," David guessed. She nodded. "They want me to stay on. As a figurehead, mostly." David's stomach turned. "And you'd have no control." "Pretty much." Olivia leaned back in her chair, exhaling slowly. "It's tempting, though. I could retire before 40. David searched her face. "Is that what you want?" Olivia's eyes flicked to the window, where snow swirled in soft spirals. "I used to think it was. Build something. Sell it. Move on. But this place, it's more than a company now." She met his gaze. "It's home." David's heart skipped a beat at the word. Home. What are you going to do? He asked. Olivia's fingers drummed the desk. I don't know. David hesitated, then said softly, whatever you choose, you won't have to do it alone. The unexpected visitor. A week later, Olivia found herself standing at David's apartment door, the January wind biting through her coat. David opened the door, surprised. You okay? He asked. I couldn't sleep, Olivia admitted. David stepped aside, letting her in. Lily was already asleep, curled beneath a quilt on the couch. Olivia's eyes softened at the sight, the weight of the day easing just slightly. They sat together at the small kitchen table, the same table where David had once stared at an eviction notice and wondered how they'd make it through. Now, the table was cluttered with Lily's drawings, crayon streaks trailing off the edges. I keep thinking about that offer, Olivia said quietly. And about why I even started all this. David waited. I wanted security, Olivia continued. After my parents died, I spent so long just trying to make sure I'd never be that vulnerable again. The company was my safety net. And now? David asked. Now? Olivia's fingers traced the rim of her coffee mug. Now it's not just mine anymore. It's yours. It's Lily's. It's everyone's. She looked up at him. I don't want to sell it. Relief washed over David, but it was quickly followed by something warmer. Pride. You built something worth keeping, he said. We built it, Olivia corrected softly. An honest conversation. Later that night, after Olivia had said goodnight to Lily and David had walked her to the door, they stood in the hallway, silent. There's something I've been meaning to say, Olivia said, her breath fogging the cold air between them. David's pulse quickened. Me too. They smiled, both hesitant, both unsure how to cross the invisible line that had been blurring for months. I'm not great at this, David admitted. I haven't. Since Lily's mom, I haven't let anyone. Me neither, Olivia interrupted softly. I've always been too busy, too guarded. But David swallowed hard. I want to try. So do I, Olivia whispered. And just like that, the space between them disappeared. Her hands found his, and his fingers curled gently around hers, the simple touch anchoring them both. It wasn't perfect, but it was something, a new kind of future. The next few months weren't a fairy tale. There were still leaky pipes and financial reports, and late nights where Lily's fever kept them both up. There were arguments, compromises, apologies. But there was also laughter. There were Sunday afternoons spent in the park, Olivia chasing Lily across the grass while David watched, his heart fuller than he'd thought possible. There were dinners at Olivia's place, where David finally felt like he wasn't just a guest, but part of something. There were quiet mornings when David woke to find Olivia asleep on the couch, Lily curled beside her, both of them dreaming under the same quilt. And for the first time in years, David Carter wasn't afraid of the future. Because no matter what storms came, he knew they'd face them, together.